I remember when I was making my way through the intermediate stages of Russian, occasionally I would find a new teacher on italki and talk to that teacher. And I remember noticing something. The first time I spoke to any new teacher, it seemed to me that my Russian was unusually good. Then if the next day I did another lesson with a teacher who I'd already spoken to 30 or 40 times, my perception was that my Russian was less good. And I thought, why is this? What is going on here? Why do I speak better when I speak to some new teacher for the first time? And I realized before too long that when you speak to someone for the first time, you engage in the same sort of self-introductory talk that we all engage in when we talk to new people for the first time. They ask you certain questions, you ask them certain questions. Why are you studying Russian? What do you do? Where are you from? Where do you live? Where are you at the moment? What other languages have you studied? There's a real repetition there of basic self-introductory stuff, and you get good at doing that stuff. You already know the words and phrases and grammar that you need to know on the whole to deal with that kind of thing. But when you talk to someone that you've already spoken to 40 times, you're not going to do that stuff anymore. When you get into a lesson or a conversation with someone like that, you know you're there to study. You already know each other. You've got to talk about something new, and that new thing by definition is going to push you because you are not as accustomed to talking about it. So when I say that you can't trust people when they just talk about the same stuff over and over again, I'm not just attacking other people. I'm talking about something that I have observed in my own, most obviously Russian, but in other languages too. And I started to feel that I was genuinely advanced. Well, okay, this isn't the only thing, but one of the things that allowed me to feel that I was genuinely advanced in Russian was my growing sense over time that pretty much irrespective of what came up, I seemed to be able to deal with it. So the sort of aborted, I don't want to call it a revolution in Belarus, but this election a couple of years ago where the results were disputed and the aftermath of that, I remember having a conversation one day with a Russian friend about that. And you know, politics isn't my forte. I don't spend all of my time talking about politics in Russian or in English, but I realized once our conversation ended that I had acquitted myself pretty well. I was talking to someone maybe a year and a half ago now, and we were talking about the effect of social media and the internet more generally on young children and teenagers as well, I suppose. And I hadn't expected to talk about it. I hadn't prepared anything. I don't know if I'd ever talked about it before specifically, but I found that I could do it. I found that I acquitted myself well. Without having to paraphrase everything that I wanted to say in some sort of extremely awkward and difficult fashion. I seemed to be able to solve the problems that came up in a wide variety of different contexts. And it's probably that more than anything else that has led me to the conclusion that my Russian is now better than my Japanese is and probably ever was. It's that ability to just say something that makes sense and that sounds good on an ever wider variety of subjects, and that is something that's missing from so many of these ridiculous 2-minute conversations we hear from the polyglots, where people just rattle off a few trite observations about how they learned the language that they are trying to speak at that moment in time. You have to be very skeptical of that sort of video, and this is why the videos that you can find here on my channel, in which I try to demonstrate for the record my level of ability in the various languages that I can speak, that's why you'll find in those videos that I have completely unscripted, unprepared conversations that are essentially an hour long and that range wildly across all sorts of different subjects, just the things that naturally come up in conversation. Because if people are putting together, 90-second presentations, even if they're unscripted, you can often tell that what is being said is semi-rehearsed. It has not been scripted, but it is something that has been said many times before by the person in question. If you have half an ounce of sense, you can start to pick up on that. If you listen to a longer conversation, you don't only get sentences delivered on some specific piece of subject matter, you also get to see the way that the person in question navigates a longer, more extended conversation. When somebody wants to change the subject or go back to a subject that they were talking about a minute ago, when people can't hear each other or need clarification, when people want to just jump in for a minute and interrupt someone, how do they navigate that? There's a certain process of, negotiation that takes place in any normal, at least any extended normal human conversation. And these are all important competencies in languages, and we navigate them with body language and facial expression, but also, of course, linguistically. That is another important thing that you don't often get. Of course, you get it sometimes, but often you notice when the polyglots talk to each other, people will speak in blocks of 2 or 3 minutes. I speak for 2 or 3 minutes, then you speak for 2 or 3 minutes, then I speak for 2 or 3 minutes. There are these uncomfortable blocks of monologue that don't really seem to combine to create normal conversations. And again, I think that there is a very underdeveloped level of discourse management, if you like, in the spoken language of many second language learners that is hidden when people just talk into cameras. And that's another criticism that I have to make of this method of displaying a level of ability. Small talk is hard. I'm learning Chinese at the moment, and often when I have a Chinese lesson, the first few minutes are just a write-off. Why? Because when I have something concrete to talk about, I can talk about it reasonably well in Chinese. Not all the time, but most of the time these days. But this discourse organizing language that we use so effortlessly in our own languages, a lot of it still just escapes me really in Chinese. I may understand it when I hear it, but I can't access it. So everything is lumpy and awkward as hell until my teacher somehow gives me a real topic that I can work with, and when she does, it's like, oh, thank God for that, now I can talk normally. But if you were to listen to me speaking Chinese, you would notice that often for the first few minutes of a lesson I was all at sea, in a way that I wouldn't be with, for example, Russian, where my discourse management is much better. Anyway, that's me blathering, and that was a partial explanation as to why on this channel you will always get proper conversations in any video in which I'm trying to display some sort of level of ability in one of the foreign languages that I pretend to be able to speak. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for listening, if indeed you were listening. I'm going to go. If you have anything you want me to talk about in the future, you can let me know in the comments. But that is it for now, so thanks very much, and ciao ciao, bye bye.